Joining me now is Politico magazine contributing writer Michael Hirsch. Michael, good to see you, and in part because you've been covering foreign policy for years. So what is your expectation at the NATO summit? What are you looking for from President Biden?
Well, for Biden, this is going to be all about, the political platform of being the leader of the free world on a campaign trail. Even before his disastrous debate, he had pointed to his resurrection of NATO, his revitalization of NATO, as one of his greatest accomplishments in the face of Russian aggression in Ukraine. And so I think you're going to see him touting that accomplishment. I think you're going to see him expecting the other major leaders to be, giving him plenty of compliments and patting him on the back, as it were, about what he's done. I mean, this is a great. I mean, this is really the best opportunity Biden has had since that debate to really kind of resurrect his image, to profile his presidency in a very positive way.
Okay, but if Donald Trump were to be reelected, what are European leaders doing to prepare for that?
They call it Trump-proofing, and they're already hard at work at
Trump-proofing?
Trump-proofing.
Okay.
Yes. That's really become the term of art. And they are out there touting how much more they're spending. One of Trump's main complaints when he was president was how few of the NATO allies actually met the target of 2% of GDP spent on defense, which was a target set way back in 2014 at the Wells Summit. And that was, a cause of complaint, not just by Trump, but even, President Obama complained regularly about what he called NATO free riders. So what they're trying to do is get more of the countries spending that amount of money. And now they're saying, well, collectively, we're spending 2%, even though a number of the key countries, including Germany, have not yet reached that goal. So that's the main thing they're doing. They're also trying to set up a new command in Wiesbaden, Germany, to address Ukraine, to be supplying Ukraine, taking it out of what was purely American command and giving it over to a European and joint European and American command at the same time. So there are various ways in which they are trying to insulate NATO from what could be an onslaught by a new president named Donald Trump.
Michael, Trump has repeatedly said that he would, quote, end the war in Ukraine. And Russian President Vladimir Putin seems to think Trump's serious. What does that look like, and how realistic is it to happen?
Well, what I've learned from various sources, the Trump campaign itself, I should say, has not commented on this, and Trump hasn't even named a national security team. But what I've been told from sources who I think are pretty familiar with Trump's thinking, he does have the outlines of a plan, and that would involve essentially meeting with Putin, handing over to Putin a portion of eastern Ukraine that he has already occupied, and this is crucial, pledging not to expand NATO further eastward, which would mean that the holdout of a promise of NATO membership to Ukraine, which you're going to hear this week at the summit, where they're going to be talking about the bridge for Ukraine. If Trump became president, that would basically be taken off the table.
Hang on, Michael. What you said about what Donald Trump would do to Putin, wouldn't that be seen as appeasing Putin?
Oh, very much so. I mean, Trump, you listen to Trump, one of the memes out on his, on the campaign circuit for him is how quickly he would end this war. I mean, he's actually said several times that even before he was sworn in, if he won the presidency, he would solve the Ukraine problem. He would cut a deal. And I think that this would involve, yes, appeasing Putin in the sense that Putin has very much made an issue of NATO's eastward expansion, and Trump would stop that, I believe, from what I'm told. Anyway.
This is a sobering conversation. We will further again with you, Michael Hirsch. President Biden has taken up a lot of our time with live coverage, but I appreciate you. Thank you.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.